Good evening, and welcome to our third installment in our conversation series in response to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and now Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many others. I'm Reverend Patrick Heery, coming to you live from Auburn, New York. Tonight's event is hosted by the Tubman Troupe and Auburn Public Theater, is conceived by Black women leaders, mothers in our community who refuse to see their sons and daughters hurt one more day by white supremacy and white privilege and the violence that accompany them. I'm the pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church. I have the honor of serving on the board of the NAACP and the Human Rights Commission. And I'm also, the best part of me, I'm a father to a beautiful, brilliant, Black biracial boy whom I love dearly. 2 weeks ago, we had a conversation among 4 white men. Problem started with white men, is perpetuated by white men, and benefits white men. So white men like me better stand up to do something. Last week, we had a holy, powerful conversation among 4 Black men who vulnerably shared their truth, their pain, their vision with us. Tonight, those 8 men come together for a conversation. Our goal is action, because while we talk, people are dying. Our talk is holy. Our talk is necessary if it leads to action, to truth. So our goal tonight is to conclude with personal commitments on how we are going to use our positional power to create change. I want to thank the creators of tonight: Gwen Weber-McLeod, Dr. Rhoda Overstreet Wilson, Dr. Johanna Rogers, Melody Smith Johnson, as well as Angela Dodabo and Carrie Idell of Auburn Public Theater. So let's welcome our guests: Terry Cuddy, Abe Gatling, Luther Isler, Tracy McLeod, Brian Muldrow, Ian Phillips, and Dave Tobin. I also wish to welcome in advance Nile Rogers, who will conclude our discussion this evening with a poetry reading. We'll just wait for our guests to join us, and then we're going to get started here with our conversation. Welcome. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, Patrick.
Hey.
And it looks like we're still waiting for a few others.
Yeah, I can't undo it because he did it. Okay, I'm gonna tell Gary. Yeah.
So while Tracy works on his camera, let's go ahead and do brief introductions in case we have people watching who weren't with us, either the first or the second discussion. We want to know who you are. So if you could give us brief introductions again, just about yourself, and I'm just going to go along the screen as I see you. So we'll start with you, Terry.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'd like to thank the Harriet Tubman Troupe and Auburn Public Theater for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm Terry Cuddy. I am a father, a teacher, a husband. I teach at Q Ondagabosis. I'm also a city councilor in Auburn, New York.
Thank you, Terry. Abe, you're up next.
Hello, my name is Abe Gatling. I'm a resident of New York City. I am a stand-up comedian, currently on hiatus, and it's good to be here.
Welcome, Abe. Ian.
My name is Ian Phillips. I'm a native of Auburn, New York. I'm on the Auburn School Board. I also serve as chair of the County Democratic Committee. I'm a former teacher, and currently I work for New York State United Teachers.
Thank you, Ian. Brian.
My name is Brian Muldrow. I own a local business here in town. Original resident. I've lived here all my life. I sit on the NAACP board. I sit on the Booker T. Washington Community Center board, and I'm founder of the Minority Professional Association here in Auburn, New York. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for being here. And Nile.
Hi everyone, I'm Nile Ahmad. I'm Johanna Rodriguez's son. I go to school down in Delaware, and I just finished up my freshman year of high school.
Welcome, Nile. It is a real honor and joy to have you with us this evening. Luther.
How you doing? So yeah, my name is Luther D. Isler. I'm a communications coordinator for State Senator Brian Benjamin. I'm also a Harlem-based cultural curator with the open mic and spoken word organization called the Harlem Bomb Shelter. I'm also a father of 2 daughters who just turned 8 and 10. And yeah, looking forward to this next conversation.
Thanks, Luther. Dave. Dave, you are muted. There you go.
How's it? All right, thanks. Sorry.
Good. No worries.
I'm Dave Tobin. I'm father of 2 adult children and the surrogate father for a black daughter, Letitia, down in Georgia. I live in upstate New York. I've been on the board of Auburn Public Theater. I've been a journalist. I'm a writer and performer, and I'm very, very glad and honored to be here. And it's been amazing 2 weeks of conversation.
It has indeed. Thank you, Dave. And Tracy.
Hi, my name is Tracy McLeod. I'm from Auburn. I'm a correctional officer, a father of 3, grandfather to 3 grandsons. Happy to be here.
Welcome, Tracy. Now, our hope tonight is to have a conversation. And so I'm going to throw questions out there occasionally, but my hope is that we can just talk to one another. And so please dive in. And if you have questions for one another, dive in, pose them. And as that conversation emerges, I'll also sit back and allow the conversation to evolve as is needed tonight. But to kick us off, I want to invite you to think back on this whole series. We've had 2 powerful, vulnerable conversations so far. My question is, though, what happened for you after the cameras turned off and you went home? Did anyone respond, react in your family, in your friends, your businesses, your political circles, whatever they were? Did you talk with colleagues, friends? Did you get social media? What kind of conversation took place, if any, beyond these cameras? Turn it over to you.
Well, I'll jump in. I think I've had a multiple level of conversations. Some of the conversations I've had, I found out how far apart we are with our discussions. People view the world very differently. And then I was able to have random people have conversations with me. I was at the getting ice cream, and somebody engaged in a conversation, and not realizing I was one of the people that were invited to the conversation. He was actually talking to one of the participants, and I could tell that he was not an advocate for social justice. He wasn't in the fight. He didn't have a lot of people that culturally around him, and I believe that he was willing to have that conversation. I think that's the healing part, that he was open-minded. We had about 10, 15-minute conversation, and I'm sure he's watching today.
Yeah, I think after it was just business as usual, outside of the occasional, text from a friend or my mother who caught the talks. She said, great job, but, outside of that, just kind of a return to normal baseline. And then everything that happened this week. So a little disheartening, I think. You'd like to think that after the talk we had last week, I thought it was good and enlightening and insightful, and then just the world reaffirmed the state of of our humanity. So it was cool, but then right back down.
Yes, same for me. Same for me, Abe. After the conversation, I talked to my wife, and pretty much, probably those who listened didn't feel free to come forward and have any conversation about it.
It was almost like we've had this deep conversation, and we left there feeling hopeful, and then realizing that we still live in a world that exists today. And watching that shortly after our conversations was a lot to take in. And I think it spikes a good conversation tonight, because that conversation that happened was productive. We thought, even though we know we didn't change the world, we just felt more therapeutic, and then with the tragedies that happened this week.
Well, events have really pushed the urgency of this, right? And I think Brian, I think we have to acknowledge the value of this conversation to this point for us, if just for us 8 participants and possibly others who have heard it. And that's how it begins. And that's how we have to continue, I think. It's the first conversation that I was part of was really hard for me. I mean, it was a white guy put on the spot with 3 other white guys, talk about white privilege, talk about racism. I've always considered myself open-minded and proactive, but it forced me to look really, really hard at myself. So that's what these 2 weeks have been for me. As the world unwinds, I'm really deep in this conversation every day, trying to figure out what to move toward. That first conversation has made subsequent conversations much easier for me with my family, my friends, my loved ones, and extended friends who I normally wouldn't be this intimate with. And that's a plus. And I think of my own abilities and talents, and well, I'll tell you now. I mean, I'm writing something about this experience for me as a white man that I think my intention is to catch somebody and awaken them. As a journalist, I knocked on a lot of strangers' doors. I was in a lot of tough places, and I'd be wary. I'd look over my shoulder, but I never feared for my life. And that's what I've been taking in this week. Different my experience is. So I'll stop there, but that's where I'm at tonight.
Can I just want to jump in and say something that watching the first videos, you know, that means a lot hearing you say that, because out of all the videos, I learned the most from you because you did struggle. And I don't remember who it was. It might have been you. One of the things you said was, somebody said that they were, their first initial to this conversation was to feel defensive. And to me, if you are not actively, you know, if you're not actively acting in racism or portrayed to be any of the negative types that have been on TV for white people, I could see how your initial feeling might be defensive. So what that did for me was allowed me to have more of a different conversation when I'm talking to different people. So now I can actually have a better conversation because of you struggling to answer those questions, because I feel in my heart you did not feel it, that negative energy that we see every day. So to me, it was easier for me to take that and have a better conversation. On the other side, what I learned was having the three brothers with us today, going to this conversation. It was a healing process for myself because I was able to not hear how I feel from another lens. And I really feel this way. And some of the impact that I took from them was, you know, I'm not alone in this fight as well.
Thank you, Brian. And I think that's a really helpful comment. And it makes me want to know, you know, what did you notice as you looked at these two conversations? What did you glean? What did you learn? Did you notice similarities? Did you notice differences between the first conversation and the last conversation?
I just wanted to follow up real quickly on something that Brian said. I think that my takeaway from watching the second conversation, participating in the first, was we rarely, as men, have the opportunity to kind of have this introspective conversation and hear other people's inner dialogue. And it was like, I feel more connected to, even though I knew Brian and Tracy before this, to have a conversation about this, to figure out how we kind of move this forward. Terry and I have known each other for a long time, but we've already kind of been shooting texts back and forth in the 2 weeks since about what can we do, and kind of looking for best practices of allies that we see. You know, if we've, like, I just was pulling out the police chief in Atlanta who did do better de-escalation. You know, Killer Mike gave a really powerful statement, and he was brought into the fold to make that statement. Like, I've just kind of been thinking about this continually for 2 weeks. And now I see in these, the 8 of us, and especially those in my community, like this is a start of something. This dialogue kind of helps us take the next step of moving these words into actions. So that's what I took out of it. You know, so I'm looking forward to that part as we continue this conversation, moving those kind of words into action.
What I found interesting, you know, comparing the two conversations, looking at the first one is, it's interesting watching the realizations of, you know, of white men to think about certain things that they never had to think about before. And I mean that in a good way, but it's interesting to watch that. One of the things that I saw you guys kind of realize is part of the white privilege is not having to think about certain things. And I mean, it's refreshing to see that revelation, to be honest. And the truth is, it's also become, you know, something that I guess I hadn't thought of, in the sense that, you know, what's normal for us isn't normal, right? Or shouldn't be normal, right? It shouldn't be normal that I'm concerned about how I'm being perceived. And the juxtaposition is, but I think what's good is, you know, it is what it is to a degree, but the first step is to kind of see it. And I think I do appreciate the, you know, the first group being able to see that they never seen those things. from that POV. And it's good hearing a lot of conversation about having conversations, because once you realize that you can't possibly see from the other person's POV, then it lends you, or it should lend you, to inquiring. So that's one thing that I like, that can come from this, based on, you know, looking at the first video, the first live conversation.
And you know, David, as you said, you were a little uncomfortable having that conversation. And when I was watching you, and you seem to be struggling a little bit because it's a difficult conversation to have, I often remind myself that we are in situations like that all the time, where we are meant to feel uncomfortable intentionally, on purpose. So to see you kind of struggling with having this conversation is the reason why a lot of other white folks don't want to have the conversation, because they know they don't have to, all right? Because of their superiority in their minds over us.
Yeah. I also think I've had this thought that we're all right now sort of victims of a divisiveness in this country that is so intense. And I think so many people have just shut it off. And and we become isolated from one another, and we become very regionalized. I mean, with our identities. I mean, even because I don't live in Auburn, you know, it's not like my identity has changed. I'm still involved with the community. I'm still a part of that community. But we aren't in a community building mindset these days, nationally. And I think we're all sort of reacting to that bit, maybe with our own withdrawal, which sort of compounds the difficulty right now.
Going back to your first question, Patrick, the first week, again, the feedback I received from my wife and people in the community were positive, and it wasn't until, you know, and I felt the conversation was strong, but the following week with Abe, Brian, Luther, and Tracy was when I realized that it became more intimate, it became more personal for me, and instead of this distance that, you know, I'll be a part of it, and then I could go back to my daily life. The second week made me even more committed because it was very real to me. You know, even though it's a screen, and you know, some of us are hundreds of miles away, it became very intimate. And now, you know, as was mentioned, the horrible events that happened this week, you know, the fact that there is a 3-week duration, and we're evolving with this national issue, and what I think we all want to do is make it local and make it something that we can work on and commit to. So I wasn't sure why the troupe wanted to do 3 weeks, but in a way, I think that this time needed to happen. We needed to commit to this time to really see that this is a problem that we need to address continually and incessantly.
Terry, I think you used a really important word there, personal. For people of color who live this every day, this is imminently personal. but for those of us who are white, it's easy to abstract it, to step out of that space, for it not to be personal. So how, for all of us, I mean, how do we make this matter of justice, how do we make it personal for everyone? How does it become personal to those who are white, for justice for people of color, for how does it become personal for men, for justice for women of color, for those of us who identify as straight or cisgender? How does it become personal for LGBTQ people of color? How do we make this personal so that we're invested in it, so that we cannot step out of it, and that we're committed to put it on the line to create change?
I just want to say, there's an artist, David Wanarovich, that says powerful things happen when the personal or the private becomes public. And, you know, that is, I think, where most, you know,
I think we're losing them.
and they do now connect.
Terry, we just seem to be having some, you're breaking in and out.
Can I?
So Ian, if you want to go, and then we can come back to Terry when he.
Yeah, or whoever. I was just going to say, Tracy mentioned, you know, you are not, as a white man, you are not forced to think about this all the time, right? I think even those of us, like Dave said, who consider ourselves to be paying attention to these things and consider ourselves to be kind of anti-racist, you know, are we doing enough if you can kind of turn that switch off? And in this conversation, the kind of personal stories that I've been told over the course of my life, I was lucky enough to have a Black man as a mentor for a large part of me growing up as a martial arts instructor and almost like a second father. And stories that he's told me, I was hired by someone right out of college, an African-American lawyer who was pinned down because he fit a description for a long period of time. And, you know, not a lot of people heard that story outside of his friend circle, and really just other people growing up, people I went to college. There's so many kind of near misses that are not on the news at all, right? They're only told to people that they interact with all the time, and every person of color has those stories. And I think as a white person, especially in a you know, white circles, you don't hear that, and even those of us who are you know, actively seeking out ways to do better, your mind is allowed to wander in a way that if you are a person of color, if you're a Black man, especially, you never are given that privilege to circle away from this, because it could happen to you. These are your own memories that you're experiencing, and you're hearing stories about what your friends and family are experiencing. And I think that reminder that every day those stories are omnipresent, I think makes the urgency come home.
Yeah, you know, if you, to answer your question, I think Ian just answered your question. I think that just him realizing, you know, that where the difference lies, we can have a conversation. I think our struggle is half the time trying to convince the conversation needs to be had, or not, or believe us. It's not politically motivated. It's not the Democrats. It's us. You know, we were Republicans before we were Democrats. Let me remind you guys that. So in history, so it's trying to convince people to believe us is a struggle. And I think, to me personally, and I can't speak for everybody else because this is how I internalize it. The most hurtful thing is to have people not believe you and fight to even have the conversation. Because, you know, when I have these conversations, a lot of times it goes to political, or it goes to, well, I have a friend that this happened to as a white man, or I have another person. We are talking about what we are experiencing every day as Black men and Black and brown people. And that's the conversation. If you could accept the fact that we are having a conversation, then we can have some type of progress. And I think, you know, that's the struggle, is trying to convince it. And I think that I think there's going to be a few people, if not a lot of people, from these conversations that we're having between us 8 people, that one of the messages were, go back to your community. And when you're having these conversations, there's no Black people in the room, and somebody makes a statement, say something. When you go back to work, say something, right? Speak up then. Not in my house. Not my children won't be with. My children will not hear this. Not in my house will this happen. If you do that, you will feel the same discrimination we feel. You will hear people coming at you differently, or changing, or having a conversation when you're not in the room about what was all that about. So it's a you will feel that experience that we feel every day and we've had forever.
And you know, and part of that, you know, behind your back stuff will be you're at end level. You know what I mean? Those are the terms they would use. And you know, just going back to something Abe was saying in our last conversation, was that in order to affect change, I've been watching the news today, and I was listening to how the governor mobilized the National Guard in Minnesota, and the state troopers as well. And can you imagine them talking about that all day and bringing all those resources to bear? But you can't bring those same resources to where they're needed to prevent this from happening to begin with.
Yeah, I think that points to just I guess, like, back to the question of how this is personal, how it's also public. Like Terry, you were talking about how change gets affected when the private becomes the public. And I agree with that to a degree. And Ian, you were talking about how, you know, I think we don't, I guess the larger part of America doesn't hear the personal stories. They don't hear what we're going through every day. And so if they could only hear that we're, you know, that we live as second-class citizens, then things would change. And Brian is talking about how the folks who do hear need to enact change, and they need to do something about it. And maybe it's the cynic in me, but I do think that there is a fundamental issue with those things. Like, the idea of making the private public, to me, is a self-excavation that maybe I'm not comfortable doing. Maybe it's unnecessary personal labor on the people being oppressed to then turn inside out to present to the public, which we have been doing for years. And then what the problem is, to me, is that we do that over and over and over again. But privilege is the luxury of not having to risk, of not having to listen, of not having to respond. And so, especially when you're in a position where you risk nothing, and by ignoring the people who are making their private public, then it doesn't even matter. We've been screaming, "Stop killing us," for 400 years. And so, I mean, I really feel like it's a question of empathy and humanity. When, I mean, like Ian, you were talking about how like your experiences with Black people influence your thinking. It's because I think it's because they were humanized. Like you through your interaction with them, they were humanized through your exposure. But like you can't expose all of white America to every Black person in America. That's an absurd claim to make. And so I do think that there needs to be a restoration of America seeing Black and brown people of color as humans. And I don't know if it's going to come through like personal interactions. I definitely think that won't hurt, but I do think that maybe we're beyond the point of trying to reach every white person and like convert them. You know what I mean? I do think that maybe it would be more efficient to reflect our humanity in laws, in representation in government, like, and then to have people respond to that. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing. Like, how do you infuse empathy into our criminal justice system? That's a crazy claim, but I don't know. I think it's something to consider.
I think that's really a very fair point, Abe. And when we did an earlier kind of conversation, you made the same point. And I think that is really well taken, that we can't expect everyone to be empathetic or to be exposed and then learn the lessons of how wrong they are. It does start with those of us who have privilege changing laws, right? So for me, as a school board member, how do we have faculty and staff that reflects our community better, right? How do we, myself as a Democratic chair in a county, how do we get more people of color elected into offices at all levels, right? And that is something that we need to start. Because when these racist policies were enacted, I think about redlining. Not every white person in America was for that. Not every person was redlining, but they became accustomed to it because the people who were racist enacted policies that embedded racism into our housing policy, right? And so the Anti-Racist Act is to kind of dismantle those policies with something better. And I think that you're absolutely right, Abe, that we have to be thinking about structures and policies that don't make it easy for racism to perpetuate. That's probably a better aim than my kind of kumbaya statement at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to.
No, but I think you can have. I think what you're saying is that yes, ultimately policy is the goal and a structural change. But again, like I think the starting point is that the personal story in the right. I shouldn't say the right, but again, you're right. You've been screaming for hundreds of years, and I think that there's always going to be pushback, but I think it's in times like this, now is an opportunity to push these conversations even more so because of what's happening around us. And I just think that the personal becoming public, that's the catalyst, that's the making the activists. But you're right, the ultimate goal is where the policies changed, where the public is the public, it moves through these stories, through these actions, because you will see even on the what's going on in Minneapolis, and they're the allies, the allies are there, and they see what's wrong. And I think that it's a question of outnumbering the racists, and that's what we're trying to do is building a coalition of anti-racists, and you know, because it's gonna, the struggle is going to continue.
Yeah, I think, I mean, y'all are both correct in that those things are necessary. Like those conversations, those exposures to Black and brown people are necessary and important. I guess I just would like to protect against the idea that that's all we need, and that is satisfactory. And I do think that's a very like enticing siren song to engage in, because if you feel like you're talking to people and you're engaging and whatever, I think it's very easy to become complacent and kind of happy with yourself that this is the kind of work you're doing, and settle there without pushing to address and operationalize, like specifically, explicitly operationalize, you know, teaching, you know, governance that infuses or dismantles these covertly and overtly racist systems that we're living in. I think it's necessary to keep that at the forefront of you know, what we're trying to do to enact change, I guess. So I agree with y'all. I think I don't know, money is also important. So
Abe, you've really sparked something for me in what you've said, and because I think that, you know, we think relationships, you know, are at least part of the key, and clearly I think we all think they are part. You know, that people who know each other care about each other, and people who care about each other stand up for each other. But what you said got me thinking about white people I know who have relationships, sometimes deep relationships, with people of color, sometimes family members, and yet they don't universalize that to the point, they don't humanize to the point that they're making the connections that you're describing, so that they're not doing anything about Black Lives Matter. And when, you know, something happens like to George Floyd, they're not taking a stand for that. And for some reason, there's a disconnect happening with their politics, with the policies that they support, with their general attitudes, actions, behavior toward people of color and these individual relationships. And, you know, I'm trying to think back, you know, what has made the difference for me. And I mean, I know that, so I grew up going to predominantly African-American schools where I sometimes was the only or one of very few white kids in the classroom. My friends were Black, my crushes were Black, my bullies were Black, everything, you know, that was my world. And we lived in a school that taught not just white dominant histories, and all of that has been very important. But I also know, you know, I picked up on that word you said about risk. And, you know, it's what do we have to lose so that we cannot step away from the table, that shared humanity that you were describing. And I mean, I know for me, and, you know, it's hard even to say, I mean, I am shaking. It comes down to, I mean, my son and my niece and nephew who are African-American, and my niece who is Korean American, and my niece who is Turkish American, and especially my son. I mean, my wife and I went through hell, grief and pain to get to him through, I mean, 6 children in heaven, 4 miscarriages, and the stillbirth of our twin sons, and then the process of adoption, and an open adoption where his birth mother chose us and has a relationship with him still, and talks to him and holds him and visits with him, and he knows her. And I think of the pain and the love that we have gone through, that she has gone through, that our church, our family has gone through to get to him. And I mean, I'll be damned if I would not do everything in my power to protect him, to make sure that a police officer or some self-appointed, you know, racist vigilante or doesn't hurt him, or that, you know, I don't do the work to dissect my own privilege, or that he doesn't have teachers who look like him, that teach his history, that, you know, he has economic opportunities and justice. And, you know, I love him so much, with a love that I like never experienced for anyone before. And how do we get people, because, you know, for me, then I transpose that love to every person. And how do we get that others to experience that depth of love, so that we can't afford to step away, because it's our family, it's our life, it's our love that's on the line here. It's our family, it's our life our love that's being slain in the streets. How do we get white people to that point?
It's more policy than ever. Like, we can't, you know, that fight is a fight that was been going on way before you and I have been born. And those emotions that you experience is emotions that we face every day. And some of those, can I ask, how old is your son?
He's almost 2 years old.
So for 2 years, you're thinking of all these things. So if you look at our grandmothers and grandfathers and our ancestors have been thinking about this thing forever, those same points. And some of those points are exhausting to fight at all avenues, at all times. So for 2 years, you've been dealing with this. And I'm not trying to belittle your feelings, but I'm just saying that the only way we can do it is changing policies and changing people's minds that are in a neutral state to bravery. If we could do that, and I'm not saying you have to, because I'm looking at these protesters on TV as everybody else is, and there is a mixture of all races at times protesting. I'm saying protest in your world. You ain't got to get out there and pick up a sign. We'd love for you to do it, but protest in your world. Go talk to your family members that you know, whatever, that are in the neutral side. Don't talk to the ones that are all the way to the extreme racist, because you're not going to change them. But talk to those people in between. Tell them to say, listen, you know, if somebody says something like this, end that. Because you know what? I'll tell you, I was fortunate enough to know a lady growing up, and I grew up with her son, and she wouldn't have any type of vulgar language in her. And I mean, the simple word of damn, she would say, don't say damn in my house, right? And she was like that with any type of racist comments or prejudice comments. And if you just start there, nobody knew in that presence of that lady not to use that type of language. That's all you could do. And vote right. That's it. We are powerless to the power. I think I got a lot of little quotes from Abe, but Abe said, you know, we cannot teach the oppressor how to teach the oppressed. We can't. They ain't gonna listen. So all we gotta do is talk to the people in between and teach them, you know, say, hey man, you know, I got some few friends. If you say something about me, I'm sure they will act a fool and correct you in their house and at their workplace.
I mean, I do wonder though, how do you teach empathy? Because part of the thing is, you know, we talk about, you know, white people who can have white friends and not necessarily detached, is because they create a sense of an exception for their black friends. You know, they're not a part of that. They're simply my friend. Well, that's the thing, right? You know, when I spoke last week about, you know, being in my friend's house, and whenever the white people would see me, they would ask me, you know, who am I here to see? When the black people see me, they're just happy to see me. Because you think about it, the black people just see me as an extension of themselves. You know, I don't know them, but we are in a sense family, right? So even when you have, you know, black friends, you see them as an extension of yourself. But then instead of extending yourself out to their extensions, you close them in to your circle, your family. No, they're separate and apart. As opposed to, no, if I can see this one person, and which, you know, Pastor, you've been able to do with your son, but that we should be doing with everyone we interact with. And then just, you know, to Abe's point about this, making a private, you know, public thing, you know, like, I mean, yeah, we've been doing that forever. You know, and you know, we're talking about, you know, Emmett Till's mother, who made it necessary to have an open casket. You talk about Trayvon's mother who spoke, everybody's mother who speaks, you know, who makes this personal. So what more personal does it have to be, you know? And not to come at you, Dave, per se, but then you said something that part of me kind of goes, right? And it's the sense that, you know, what happens now makes it somehow more pressing. And then, but for me, I'm kind of like, why wasn't the last one pressing? You know, it is absolutely great that we're doing this, but we did this inspired by Ahmaud Arbery. And then last week I said the statement, you know, that, you know, in a sense it's just another Tuesday, but then on the next Monday, we heard about in Central Park where Amy Cooper pretended that she was being attacked by Christopher Cooper, you know, betting on the fact that because she's a black male, that there will be some sort of, you know, serious response to that. And then the next day we have George Floyd. You know, we are getting less time in between trauma to even go through cycles of grief. So it's, you know, I want to be optimistic. I like seeing, you know, white allies in these new videos jumping in. But part of me just has this gut desire to not get excited about any of it. Because next Tuesday, who is it going to be that we're writing poetry about, you know?
I mean, Luther, you said that before, just another Tuesday. It's really incredible that even in a world that is shut down, that this is not shut down. This continues, you know, and I think that should wake white people up if they haven't been woken up before.
Tracy, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just saying, given what's going on in all the news coverage, if there is going to be a change, you would think it'd be happening now.
Yeah.
So, but
I saw that micro expression, Abe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
is it less? Is it more news coverage now than before? You know, I don't know.
I think that the one thing that's helped is the video cameras and everybody having cell phones with video cameras on it, because as hard as it is to prove that this stuff happens, it was harder to prove when there was no video of it, and you can see the delay in the response. So I think that helps to have that information out there. And I gotta tell you, I chuckled when Tracy said that, but I believe that naturally or unnaturally or murder, when you watch somebody transition from life to death, it does something to you. And even though he died at the hospital, it was a transition that will sit with somebody, and they saw it, and they didn't, you know, it was actually on video.
But we saw Philando Castile shot in his own car while on Facebook Live.
You did see that. We did see that. So now I'm speechless when it came to that. We did see that.
you know, Garner get choked out.
I wish I didn't have that at the top of my tongue to respond.
Yeah.
You know, It's like I wish I didn't have a Rolodex of every person who got killed and tell you, well, when this person got killed, when this person had their hands up, this person was laying down. It's like I wish I didn't have that memorized and ready to just say like that. You know what I'm saying?
I guess that's what I mean by this this idea that, like, I don't know, I was talking to a buddy of mine today about like the presence of social media in terms of how we respond, how we how we receive information, and then how we process it. But I think like Brian and Luther nailed it. Like we just named two, and like Eric Garner on video. Like there's three Black deaths on video. And Brian, you're right. It should be like, in a rational world, this should spark Tracy. This should spark something, but it hasn't, and it continues to fail to do so. And I do think it's about who chooses to engage. Like do you really think any CEO of a Fortune 500 company is watching George Floyd get a knee to his neck? Do you think anyone you would love to watch this video in power is watching it and going, oh yeah, or they are, and it doesn't mean anything because they don't have to engage with it? And so I think that it's again, like, necessary to Ian, what is your exact title, like, in terms of teaching?
Oh, I'm on the school board in Auburn.
Okay. Do you feel like, because I was thinking about, Luther asked, like, how do we ingrain empathy? Like, how do we start? And I was thinking, like, old people aren't gonna, like, they're done. Their brains have cemented. They're obdurate. No offense, but the plasticity of your brain is just whatever you got, you got. And so I wonder if starting with children, if molding their minds, rejiggering school curriculums, or creating environments where even if you are in a predominantly white classroom, or you don't have a teacher of color or something, that there are ways to but usher kids into thinking about race differently, ushering youth into seeing people like Nile as people, because that stuff starts really early. But I do think it might starting with the educational system might be useful. I don't know.
Abe, I want to jump in for a second. My wife is a librarian, and as I said earlier, we have a 10-year-old son, and she's reading a book by Ibram X. Kendi, and there's a youth version of the book that she ordered for to read with our son. But this is the book, and it's called Stamped. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head as far as young people really introducing them to these difficult issues, because at a young age, that's the time to really teach them about history, and how conflicting it is from how race plays a big part in our history, and how there needs to be an active anti-racist agenda to fight it. And I think that's important. Again, Ian, as a member of the school board, and so I think that you're right, Abe. That's a good starting point, and also helps with some of the long-term issues that we're having now. But if we start young, that can definitely help.
I also think that looking back at this week, we'll start with Amy Cooper, because that happened first. So Amy Cooper gets mad at a person. It could be anybody. It could be a black person. It could be a white person. And we'll use those conversations differently. She said on that phone that a black man is attacking me. And she kept emphasizing it over and over again, expecting the police to act in a violent way, to act more rational. I think this conversation, I think Amy Cooper could possibly be offered a little bit crazy. So she was dealing with a white person. I think she still would have called the police. But this particular time, she was up against a black man. And she emphasized it knowing that the police will come differently. Then what happened on Tuesday, I believe, not only does this cop press his knee into with other cops holding him down, he felt he was doing this in the comfort of a video being recorded by multiple people, in comfort of his peers. Like, it wasn't like he was alone on a back alley. He was comfortable doing this. That's policy. That's policy. If you guys, if nobody can believe that there is something there in those two events, the caller who overreacted, emphasizing black man, is attacking me, which he wasn't. The police overreacting in front of his peers, in front of a video camera, shows you how far apart we really are in this conversation if you don't even see that that could be a problem.
And in terms of policy, we're looking at the fact that he got charged with what, murder 3?
Third degree manslaughter, which is only exists in 3 states, and Minnesota just happens to be one.
Which can be played down to a misdemeanor if they wanted to.
And none of those is a life sentence, you know. That's ridiculous, you know, and that's policy. The fact that that's allowed, you know. Listen, even if you give police room to do their job, once they're not doing their job, then you treat them like a civilian who did something wrong. You killed somebody. You did something knowingly with the opportunity not to. You're not in danger, so there's no sense of self-defense. So you committed murder. That is it. It's plain. So yeah, that does become policy. And what happens is that perpetuates to this idea that goes to everyone that it is not that bad. You know, killing is bad, but killing a black person, not that bad, because you're not going to get that much of a punishment for it. We are getting more punishment than we've seen, which is something to celebrate, but it's not equivalent to the crime that was committed.
And I'm tired of hearing one bad apple out of the police force. So let me address that. First of all, if you're a police department, you cannot have a bad apple. Okay, you can't. You don't get that pass to have one bad apple. Okay, I'm sorry that you got to shoot for 100% perfection, but that's what you have to do. Second of all, that one bad apple didn't do one bad thing and then got, like, it usually is a cumulative, it's a resume of bad stuff. And one bad apple is spoiling a whole bunch. No, it's not spoiling a whole bunch. The whole bunch is bad. Because if you got 10 bad police officers, I've seen this on memes, so if anybody's seen it, 10 bad, and you got 1,000 good ones, and they just allow this to happen, you got 1,010 bad police officers. You cannot, you guys at any given time, this cop code needs to stop, and they should have jumped off, and somebody said, okay, we got him down, let's go.
Yeah.
Chris Rock has a joke about that. He said, you know, if you're an airplane pilot and someone crashes, you're gonna say, oh, we got a lot of good airplane pilots with one bad apple. You can't afford to have one bad apple in airplane pilots, right? So why is it that you have one bad apple is allowed in the police officers? It's not okay.
And I do think there's an interesting thing where you have to discipline the people who are disciplining, like cops disciplining other cops, because I do think there's this idea of that the in group of being a police officer is stronger than the larger group of just being people. Like, I do think cops are very quick to defend other cops because they are cops, much like the kind of reverse that's happening where Black and brown people aren't seen as human. Like, cops, because they are cops, see each other as brothers. And so you're quicker to defend your brother than you are to defend someone you don't even see as an individual. And I think maybe Brian is right, where like there needs to be an understanding. Like, you can see your dudes in your precinct as brothers, but that can't close you off from seeing the civilians you've sworn to protect as individuals. And then I also think, like, about Amy Cooper, like, she committed a crime. Like, a false 911 call, falsifying a 911 call is a crime. And the fact that she hasn't been punished for that crime is indicative of our inability to enforce policy. That's just a very small example of a bigger thing. And so maybe that comes from that, you know, a change in that comes from a pressure from people to hold institutions accountable. And I think holding institutions accountable for equal law enforcement across the board is, you know, one, necessary, and two, might be a useful way to enact change. holding our institutions accountable, because they are beholden to the people. And so if we fail to hold them accountable, then they just do whatever they want and receive no retribution for it. So I don't know, also something to consider.
But what's interesting about that is, and it also connects to this empathy thing on a different type of level, is so my boss, Senator Brian Benjamin, he just proposed a bill making those type of false calls equal to a hate crime. But then what happens, and this is what happens with, with downstate versus upstate sometimes, is you still, downstate, upstate is different sometimes. So you say like, oh, we don't understand that issue because it's not prevalent in our community. So we're not going to support pushing our legislators to support that particular bill. And that stuff happens. It happens until, New York City problems become New York City problems until they happen in Auburn, But that happens around the whole world, right? Florida issues are Florida issues until it happens in Minneapolis. You know what I'm saying? We need to all stop doing that and just say a problem is a problem. And from whatever angle we sit at, we need to be able to use whatever privilege we have to support finding the solution, whether or not it personally benefits us or not.
I think that divide that you just mentioned, Luther, it's not it's a downstate problem. I mean, we had an incident today where a police officer in Fulton, which is a very short drive from where we are in Auburn, posted a racist meme and then was sending a bunch of racist messages out that was covered in Syracuse.com, so that these things are not happening everywhere is absolutely false.
And I'll go and say we had a local guy from Auburn. Ian was very involved in this, and happened to Skinny Atlas, and we could not. I think sometimes our voices we can hear because we're not in New York. We don't get the national spotlight. We don't have a mass amount of people to fight these. We need our counterparts and to help us.
And Luther, and they use that as an excuse not to support the bill because they know that happens in their community as well.
Yeah, so he's absolutely right. So I think that this is information for you to go back and tell your legislator that talk to us up here. We'll give us some cases, okay? We'll give us some cases.
Abe, you spoke earlier of children, and that speaks to a question from Melody Smith Johnson, a woman I think you may be a little acquainted with, one of our organizers tonight, that she wanted me to share, and I want to be sure that we get in our time together here. She says, Black men from all generations across all social media are asking white men, what will you do to raise children who don't kill my children? I put that question out there, particularly to the white panelists, but for everyone.
Well, for us, we just continue to talk to our children and prepare them for when they leave our homes and hope that they come back safely. I mean, we've been doing this for the longest time. So that's what we'll continue to do.
Yeah, I think the thing is start in your home, man. You guys got your kids, teach them the same things, to love everybody, treat everybody, even if they don't have kids in their circle of Black and brown kids, but just give them some love and tell them, I think you got to play, you're going to have to represent us in your house if you don't have anybody to represent us.
I'm not a father, but if we think about that sentiment of it takes a village, right? So the children in my village of Auburn, I need to take responsibility for how they are growing up, right? Especially as a school board member. So that is changing the way that they learn about their history. Abe, to your point, that is making sure that maybe those who don't have the home life that Brian has advocated for still are exposed to people of color as mentors, as people of authority in their schools, as people that are highly respected, who have value. to them, so that even if they're not being taught properly in their own homes, they're still getting some of that. I mean, that's the responsibility of a good education, period. And I think that we need to realize that this, our failure to connect as a humanity puts us at a disadvantage overall, right? So if we raise children that are unaware of their privilege and bias when they go out into the wider world, Terry and I went to Alfred University. If you're not exposed to Black people and their humanity in your hometown, and then you go off to college and you go off into the wider world, you are at a disadvantage as a white person. So because you're not going to be able to do what you want to do, get the full experience of the rest of humanity. So I think that that's something that if you're just operating from a place of self-interest, which I hope we're not, you have to think about it that way. You are doing yourself a disservice. We're doing our white children a disservice by not properly educating them and building that empathy into them.
I think, the conversation I've had with my son today about, what I've been doing the last 3 weeks in this conversation, and having to explain to him what's going on in the world and why it's important to be involved, and to know that there are people underserved and oppressed in our culture, and it's part of our culture that it needs to be stopped. And just telling him that he understands. He's like, he understands it's wrong. And I think it's a continual conversation with our children to make sure that how I grew up isn't perpetuated. It's an active fight to not continue these stereotypes, not continue the hatred that is endemic in structurally in our culture. And it's in our laws, it's in just so much of our culture, and it's an you have to counter it. You have to be conscious of it and counter it and fight it on a continual basis. So, and again, John sees us struggle with that. And, even, the author I mentioned earlier talks about this, there's ways in which we can be an assimilationist one day, and the same day we can be anti-racist, assimilation, and a segregationist all in one day, and that's the thing, is to be aware of the kinds of belief systems that go through us. And I know I'm being abstract, and I should stop now because I think it's more effective being personal, but these are things that are part of our culture that we need to address and counter.
The personal is so powerful. And my kids are grown now, but when they were little, we were involved with the Fresh Air program, which brings kids up from New York City. And a young African-American girl came up, and when she was 6, 7, and she came up the next year, and she came up every year, and her sisters came up. And so my kids developed just a love for her, like a sister. And my kids as adults, I think I've seen them interrupt racist comments. I've seen them go out of their way to befriend people of color, and many cultures. I don't have grandkids, but I expect if I ever do, that they will benefit from my own kids' relationship with Letitia, who I spoke to this morning. And For me, the personal has always been the most powerful. Personal writing has been the most powerful writing. And I think again, that is my avenue, my best avenue, probably, to continue this conversation in a broader way with readers, as well as with my children, my adult children, and my friends and my family, and the people that I encounter in public life.
I would say that, and this touches on Abe and Ian and Terry and what a number of you have, Brian, a number of you have already said, but we need teachers of color, we need administrators and principals of color, we need curricula that tells the story, it teaches the stories, the histories, the art, the literature of not just white Eurocentric stories, that of people of color, of women, of the queer community. We need to teach our white children to stand up. If they see something like this happening or hear it, they need to step in and insert their privilege, insert their bodies to stop this. We need to have conversations. You know, the research has shown that kids develop racial bias by 4 or 5 years old. So if we're not having conversations before 4 years old, that plasticity that you talked about, Abe, it's already starting to shape. And when we don't have the conversations, kids fill in the blanks. And so if we're not having conversations with our white children about George Floyd or about Rihanna or about anything that has been happening, we are fostering this violence. I mean, there are developmentally appropriate ways to have these conversations. We need to be, and we need to be surrounding our white children with books and art and movies and history that represents the voices of people of color, as well as many other communities that have been historically marginalized. With that said, I want to move us to our culmination, which is action. And this is something, when we talked on Thursday night, our group was in consensus. Part of the, we're tired of just, and especially people of color are tired of just having these conversations and them going nowhere. Just being another cathartic experience for white people who move on, and then yet another killing, yet another. And so what action are we personally, each of us, willing to commit to tonight, to especially to use our positional power to create change? And, what are we going to do? It doesn't have to be maybe we don't know every step down the line, but what are we willing, what action can each of us individually and collectively take to go from here?
Well, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I have had some struggles, as you guys could see with these kind of conversations, but you know what? I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing, and I think that I want to represent our people in the best form, and I will also have conversations that are tough, but basically I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing.
I'm going to put myself out there with some writing. I'm not sure the best outlets, but I intend to write personally and write movingly, and continue these conversations and engage with you guys. I hope, I will. I'll engage with you guys. I'm going to stay in touch with and lean on you at times, consult with you, ask you questions. So I can commit to that.
in the same or similar vein, like a lot of work I do specifically artistically is kind of insular to the community. But I think that one thing that I can do is create spaces for these conversations, opportunities where we are inviting, rather than one thing, like I said, I've enjoyed these. I've enjoyed hearing you guys, hear, listen, engage, think, and evolve, and I think opening the door to the possibility of more of that is something that we can do from this end that I could definitely be a part of.
Cool. Great.
I think I'm going to get in touch with our human rights leader and start having conversations with him about what are we going to do locally. Also get in touch with our NAACP group to have that same level of conversation, to see what we can start on a local level, see what happens.
Harry?
Yes, thank you. And Tracy, just know that you will have myself on the receiving end, and to work with you in coalition, the Human Rights Commission, the NAACP, that you will have an ally. And I promise to commit as an Auburn City Councilor to do more. Again, the city, has a history of, celebrating our equal rights heritage, but there's more we can do. And now is the time to do that. So what I want to do is to, show a commitment to the Black community. I know that there's more that needs to be done. Even though this is a national issue, it is important to know that we as a city show solidarity locally. And sometimes it means stating the obvious and condemning actions hundreds of miles away. It is gestures, sometimes it's gestures like that speak volumes to let people who are oppressed know that they're not alone. And I commit to that.
Oh, no, Ian, you sure? Okay. I think I had a question, I guess, for Terry, where you might not have the answer right now, but do you have an idea of what that would look like? Like what that sentiment would look like implemented? Like the idea that you want to show Black people in your local community that they are supported. You want to do more, I think, to protect them, and just
absolutely. No, I do. It's not so much a plan, but the starting point is that there have been community-wide dialogues. There have been groups that Celebrate Diverse Auburn that have really worked with local law enforcement, and there have been strides, right? But again, here we are now, and what I find valuable in this conversation, and I do credit the wisdom of Melody, Angela, Rhoda, the Harry Tubman Troupe, all that have done this is the unique perspective of and the format of what this is, and so what that looks like to me is after this, reaching out to leadership in the law enforcement, opening up avenues of communication that haven't really been open before. And I'll be honest with you, I have not. One of my colleagues has been very active in trying to build bridges. My colleague Jimmy Giantino, but I've been absent, so I think working with Jimmy and finding new ways to build these kind of partnerships, I think is going, is my commitment. So all I want to say is I want to build on what's been started, but what these 3 weeks have shown me is that I need to get more involved, and that is opening new avenues of communication between some of us here, all of us here, and my colleagues on city council and in law enforcement. So that's where I'm at right now, and I think I think that's a good starting point.
I'll jump in. So I have the pleasure of serving on the school board with one of the organizers of this event, Rhoda Overstreet Wilson, and I spoke to her before I joined the school board, and I spoke to Gwen about even before I was on the school board about how do we make it a priority to recruit more Black faculty and staff members at our school district. And there's definitely been attempts made in the year and a half that I've been on the school board. But ultimately, to Abe's point, outcomes matter, right? You can talk about it all day. You can say this is a priority for us, but we have to have measurable outcomes, and we have to check in on those all the time. And are we making progress? What's working? What's not working? So I'm committed to kind of continually checking in on the outcomes, the measurable outcomes to get us to that goal in our school district. And then, I think the point that Brian keeps making is don't let that happen in your house. And I'm committed to in my house, which is also my workplace, I consider kind of my house. How can I make my, workplace engage in these conversations and call out things that we're not doing right or could be doing better? How can in my Democratic committee make sure that we are doing a good job of recruiting people of color who are community leaders to be on the Democratic committee and run for elected office? We've made some attempts there, but ultimately outcomes, we have to be successful, and we can't say, oh, we tried and it was too hard. We have to be committed to that long term and stay with it. And so I'm committed to both of those things in the near term.
I started an association called Minority Professional Association, and I hope that you guys all join and pay attention to it and try to figure out what we're doing. We're still figuring out, trying to figure things out. We're brand new. We got our board together, but hopefully that will change some of the image, because this is a highly populated working minority population. I just wanted them to be represented as well. And I got to tell you that looking back at this panel, some of these guys I've never even met, but I feel close to all you guys. And I really think this is where it starts. I feel like I've healed myself. I got some answers. I got some insight. I know I'm not alone, and I appreciate it. And, and I hopefully I'll be working with you. I know I'll be working with you, Mr. Phillips, in the near future. So
yeah, I feel the same way, Brian. I say we've kind of known each other a little bit for a couple of years now, but it's kind of a wave. Back when we went to the grocery store, it's kind of a quick wave at the grocery store. Now we're gonna have to have a stop and have a longer conversation.
Yeah.
And if we ever get together in person, I look forward to that.
I guess real quick, sorry. I think I'm committed to holding myself and institutions that I can, possibly influence more accountable in terms of enacting law, in terms of in my own life, speaking to, and I think I think more importantly for me, I think there's a conversation about how the driving force for a lot of these conversations, the driving force for a lot of activism has been Black women primarily. I do think they are the backbone for this, and have historically been the backbone for this push for equality. And I do think that there's a problem where they go to bat for us, but when it comes time for us to go to bat for them, we're not there. at all. I do think I need to hold myself more accountable to lessen the load for them in any way possible. So, you know, and when things like this happen to a Sandra Bland, to ride as hard for her so that she doesn't become an addendum to Ahmaud Arbery. I think I guess that's what I'm going to do in terms of, but I do think it's a necessary thing to uphold them just as hard as they're upholding us, because they do way more than we do. So I guess being more aware of that as well. Yeah, and that's hard, because sometimes that's having conversations with your boys who perpetuate like misogynoir and be like, and it's a similar conversation, be like, nah, that's not cool, that's risk, you know. And I haven't been batting 1,000 in that regard for sure. So yeah.
Thank you, Abe. Anyone else on action going from here? Well, let me share my commitments then. I commit to raising and continuing to raise an empowered Black man who knows the beauty of his skin and his stories, and of whom I have constant conversations about all that we've been talking about tonight. And commit to continuing to try to better understand and be aware of and challenge my own, all the many times, always, that my privilege shows up and operates in my behavior and my speech, especially when I try to lead, often in times when I shouldn't be occupying that role. I commit to continuing to preach about this and trying to lead my church in these conversations as well as actions. And there's my son, Emerson. And right, tomorrow I'll be preaching about the protests, and well, it'll be part of my sermon will include talking about the protests and the riots, and I'm going to say some things that some of my white parishioners and some of my white family are not going to like, but need to be said. And also trying to be part of organizing collective action here in Auburn. So there have been some emails going back and forth just the last couple days where we're trying to get together all the advocacy leadership of Cayuga County, NAACP, Human Rights Commission, Harriet Tubman Center for Justice and Peace, Celebrate Diverse Auburn. You'll be getting, all of you panelists will be getting an invite, if you haven't already, to try to come up with concrete action to take here in Cayuga County that will lead to substantive change. And we already have a Zoom meeting scheduled tomorrow night. And if you want to be in on that meeting, and this goes for anyone watching, email me, post on Facebook, we'll get you an invitation. My email, pastor@westminsterauburn.org. Make sure that you're in on that Zoom meeting to determine concrete steps going forward and who's going to be accountable for them, deadlines, getting them done. Because that's been my frustration and challenge, and I know for so many people, is that, you know, and I'm sure this is true for lots of communities, it's been really hard to see organized action take place in this community and to see organizations working together rather than in silos. And so I'm really excited about that. And I'm excited to know that's going to be building on the 3 conversations that we've been having. And so tonight is not the end. It's not the beginning either. It's been going centuries, and we've been having this conversation. And Brian, as you said, every Black parent, every Black person has been having this conversation all their life and carrying this all their lives. And so it's not the beginning, not the end. But that's what our commitment is tonight, that we continue to take action and talking about our future, talking about those who are going to be leading us and the most important voices for us. I want to turn this over now to Nile, who is going to share with us a poetry reading. Before I do, I just want to make sure, though, panelists, any final words before Nile closes us out? Okay, Nile, it's all yours. Please take us out.
Hey everybody, I'm Nile. Today I'll be reading you I Too Sing America by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when the company comes. But I laugh, eat well, and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.